Alright, this is a crankshaft for a 99 200 horsepower EFI Mercury two-stroke outboard that we're remanufacturing for a customer of ours. We're in this part of the process is crankshaft assembly. We're replacing some bearings. I'm going to show you replacing the main bearing right here. This one's already brand new. It's already replaced. We're going to take the other one off, the old one off, and put a new one on. It has this retaining clip. Just holds it in there until you can assemble it. That's the outer race. That's the clip that went to the floor. We don't care. That's the bearing right there. These are the needles that are encased in a plastic cage. They hold the crankshaft from moving back and forth. They're mains. The block goes around there, which you'll see in a later video, so don't worry about it. You have to be careful that they both go in the same way. You see the narrow part of the case, the outer race has got a smaller groove or a space between the grooves, so it has to go the same way. These alignment holes will align on a pin. It'll keep the bearing from moving when it's in the block, and these will actually help lube it, so they're really important it goes in right. So take them apart like that, two pieces. These are a fractured bearing. They're made in one piece and then they're broken apart. You can see how it's rough. We talked about that before. We put the needles on. It's in a cage like that. Make sure this is the same. Small side down, like that. Take our retaining spring, put it on there, and that's it. That's on there, ready. They seldom go bad. These would be passable to reuse, but our theory is if we're going to have it all apart, we might as well replace all the bearings. Alright, we're continuing to install new bearings on this crankshaft. This is the old bottom bearing was here. I drove it off. We're installing a new one. Again, probably could get another 2,000 hours out of that bearing, but we might as well replace them all. We got the new bearing in our kit. We're going to use our fancy drift tool, which is a big socket. Drag it in. Starts to bottom out. The old bearing is a nice drift. By the way, this is the flywheel, which makes an excellent crankshaft stand. So I'm going to put this back in here. Careful not to hit the light. That's why it's great to have plastic protection. It would be shard of glass right now, which would probably go viral. It's on there. Take our shim out. Okay, we also installed brand new crankshaft seals. There's one there. This is the top of the block. It's the top bearing carrier. Before we assemble everything, we make sure there's all new seals in it. So here's our seal. Unfortunately, I've already removed the old one, but we'll cover removing seals on another video. One thing that pretty much everybody doesn't do is quite often it's better to seat these seals in a little gasket adhesive. This is called Mercury. You can't even read it anymore. It's called Perfect Seal. Just the outer side of the seal can leak past, and unfortunately sometimes they're not tight enough and they actually pop out. So just bed it in a little bit of Perfect Seal, helps it go in too. This is a specially made seal driver, but pretty much everybody has big sockets around. You can substitute a big socket, that works too. Sometimes it works just as good. We'll use the seal driver though. You got to use a little bit of finesse, because if it goes in crooked, you're going to ruin it. When we ruin it, it's okay, because we got several others, and we just pull it out with another one, but it's starting to go a little crooked, but we have time to save it. We just got to kick it to the other side. There it is. Another thing you have to do is you have to make sure, run your finger around it, make sure it's flush all the way around. If this seal is crooked this way, it won't seal correctly and it won't last, and it'll blow out and cause a lean condition on your motor. But that's pretty much it, installing crankshaft seals. Okay, we're ready to put the pistons in the block. The block is extremely clean, as you can see. And importantly, we have everything we're going to need to install the pistons. These are the ring compressors. We're going to use the back side of this hammer to put them in there. Ring installation tool and feeler gauge. You got to learn what we're going to use them for. And this is how we organize our parts. This is all the parts for this motor we're rebuilding. We hang them all. We build a special stand for all the reman parts, rather than have them in a big pile on the floor or on the bench. It works out much better. Alright, we have our pistons ready for final installation. I put them in here initially with the steel rod through the wrist pin holes. And all pistons have a hole where the wrist pin goes through. Just to make sure they're in the right hole, I pre-lubed the cylinders. I will show you how to do that after I remove the pistons and install the rings. But you'll see, I'll say up on them. They only go in a specific way. And you see SSS stands for starboard, starboard, starboard. If you put a port piston on the starboard side, the motor will not run. And it'll actually damage itself. See, on this side it's port, port, port. And the 10 is, they're all 10 over, which is the minimum you could bore it to, which is always best to bore it to the minimum. So you have your pin, and you notice it lines up on a spot where there's no ports. So the ring separation has got to run right past here, right where there is no hole in the cylinder. Two strokes need ports. Ports line up with the cutouts in the piston and allow fuel to get in and exhaust to get out. So your intake's here, exhaust is here. You can see that's why it's all carboned up. Exhaust. So that's why the ring alignment and the ring pins are so important. Okay, I've got my rings out, and now I can remove my piston. It's just here as in a holding pattern. Pull it out of there. There it is, right there. Now this is an important step here that we do. We check the end gap. We got to put our rings in like this. Make sure it's even all around the top, very flush. And then we check. Now we're ready to check our end gap. This makes sure that cylinder's bored correctly and the right right rings came with the piston. Once we got our ring installed, even all the way on the top, just check it with your finger. You find the feeler gauge that fits. In this case, it's 24 thousandths, which is fine. It's within specs, and it fits perfect. Now we leave that feeler gauge out, and we do it with all the other rings for all the other pistons, including one more for this piston. These pistons have 2 rings each. So we're ready to install our rings. You notice all 2 strokes have a ring pin. Very important that you locate that. The rings have to go in a certain way because the cylinders are ported. You don't want the end gap to catch a port. So we'll take our tool, which we have handy. So install this.
Sometimes it's even easier with your fingers, but we'll use the tool. It's in there. That has to line up right there. We put the ring compressor on it. We got to realign it. And that's it. You gotta, a lot of times they're labeled top. This one, it's labeled top, means top of the ring. The rings are actually tapered. Hopefully you can see that. I don't know if you can or not. But the ring is tapered and the groove is tapered. There you go. You probably can see that. And it'll only go in with the tapered part facing up. If you put it in wrong, you'll probably never get the piston in, which is probably a good thing, because then you can't run the motor incorrectly with the piston in upside down. So each ring is installed. We're gonna, there's already a little bit of lube on this piston, but we're gonna lube it a little more. There we go. This is 2-stroke oil, just a regular bottle. Bought at Lowe's. And we'll spray it over the block because the block needs oil too. And we'll install our ring compressor. It says, you can read that, it says bottom because it's got a slight taper to it. Remember, you're going to line up those pins. You can always rotate the piston a little bit. That feels good. Remember, up is up. I think I'm going to have to turn this ring compressor around. Put this in there. Sometimes you got to grab the bottom of the rod and guide it through the hole in the block. Move this over. That's in there tight. You hold this with your left hand. Tap. Now just tap it. Just tap. And you're in. So, time to do that 5 more times and the pistons are in the block. We're going to be flipping this engine, so we just put these cylinder heads on temporarily so the pistons don't fall out when we're flip it over. So, there you go. That's it. 2 bolts. That's it. No gasket. We'll install the gasket later when the crank's installed. As you see now, block is rotated. It's on a pivot. Hopefully most of you are familiar with engine stands. Now we can install the crankshaft. Alright, now we're going to install the crankshaft. I don't know if you remember from a previous video, we have alignment pins here and here. They go in corresponding holes in the main bearing. Right there. Actually, that's it right there. So, we'll lower this in very carefully. These are seal rings. You divide one cylinder from each other. I want you to take a moment and think about why you need them. All 2-strokes have some type of seal ring because it can't run without it. All 2-strokes with more than one piston needs a seal ring between the two. And you can think about it. I'm going to put the answer in probably the printed section of these videos. So we got our holes here. That right there, hopefully you can see it right there. It's a alignment hole. It goes into corresponding pin. So I'm probably not going to videotape this because it's a lot of screwing around. Yep, that one just went down. So we got one more. Dirt on there. Anyways, it's more done by feel than anything else. Feel and experience. So if you don't line up that pin and you bolt it together, the engine will not run along the bolt pin. That's usually not that easy. Now we're going to install bearing end cap top bearing end cap, bottom bearing end cap. This has got to hold the crank in place while I install the connecting rods. Tapping. This is also bedded in perfect seal. There's O-rings, seals. Remember putting the seals in? There you go. Now we can put the bolts in. We know the crankshaft's aligned perfectly if the bolts go in. This is a nice thing. And if we jar this crank, it won't come out and we won't lose our main bearing alignment. Okay, now we're going to put the connecting rod bearings on. I took an old piston off another out of my parts room just to show you. So the piston's in here like this, inside the cylinder. You watch me put it in. I have already taken the rod caps off. They're on the bench in order. And very important, one rod cap will not fit another rod. It won't fit on backwards because it's a jagged, fractured rod, which means they made it in one piece and then they took a machine and they broke it. So the reason they do that is this mating surface in here has to be perfect. If there's a ridge in there, right in there, it'll wear out the bearing very quickly because there'll be a ridge. So as I said, the rod cap's already off. And they're in specific order on my bench, which you can't see. And we're going to be pulling them up and installing rod caps. I'm going to use this threaded shift shaft to pull them up through. It just happens to be the same thread as what I need for the connecting rod. Here we go. Just got to pick a middle one here. Got to thread in where the rod bolt would go. There we go. And there's your connecting rod just pulled up. Now I can install the bearings. Alright, we're installing the bearings. Rod is up right here. Here's the bottom half of the bearing. Rotate it in there. Top half. Sure that's tight. A little squirted two-stroke oil. Okay. Third one over. Like I said, if it doesn't match, the motor go boom. It's such a nice fit. It's once you tighten up these bolts, these rod bolts, they're brand new by the way, you won't be able to see the seam, which is pretty nice. Perfect fit. Now we have to do it 5 more times and we're all set. Another thing to be said about connecting rod alignment, if you're wrong, there'll be big gaps, gouges. It'll be crooked. Alright, okay, all the rods are attached, lined up nice, I'm happy. And this one test, make sure you didn't screw up. Will it rotate? It does. Rotates all the way around with relative ease. That's about what they feel like when they're all assembled correctly. So we're ready to keep on cranking here. So I just completed torquing all the connecting rod bolts. I'm not going to give you torque values on any videos just because It's something you could look up. If you hear me wrong, you can destroy the motor. And you should have a book handy anyway. So if you're doing this just by video, you're gonna mess up the rebuild. So you're gonna need all the information you can get, videos, probably several videos, just in case somebody does it different than me. You can decide he's smarter than me. I don't know, but you should have a book, preferably the OEM book, made by Mercury in this case. So as we say, the two halves are put together. Crankshaft now is tightly in place. After I do this and torque all the bolts in sequence using the book, we like to take the flywheel, put it on here, just make sure it turns over easily, and this does. No resistance, even all the way around. If it doesn't turn or turns pretty difficult, you did something wrong, it's got to come back apart. And you have to scrape off all the anaerobic sealer because it will be hard. All right, and that's it. We're ready to assemble some reeds for the intake here. Notice we had seal rings. I didn't tell you what they did. I want you to figure it out, but we also have 1, 2, this is just a chamber for bolts, 3, 4, 5, 6 for 6 cylinders, 6 separate chambers, and we'll have 6 separate reed cages with reeds for each one. Okay, I'm going to go through reed valves. These is a reed cage. These stainless pieces are the reeds. They let air inside the engine, and when the piston comes back and tries to force air back, it acts like a check valve and seals it off. It's just a lot like a reed organ. But you get gaps in them. If we can see it, I'll try here. The light coming through, there's not supposed to be any light coming through. I mean, it's old, so the reeds seldom, if ever, break. 1 out of 1,000 repairs, maybe 1 out of 500. It's got a busted reed, and usually the fuel spits back at you, so you know right away that's it. So we're going to take this all apart and show you how to reset them, tweak them a little bit. They don't need to be replaced. They really don't wear out. So we've got the reeds off. They're all cleaned. Just a little bit of dirt on it, just basically paper towel. And you just pick out the way it's go down. There's a little imprint which way it went down. I don't really like to flip them over. You also inspect the rubber coating on this particular reed cage. They don't all have it. They have rubber coating. Make sure it's not cracked or chipped. I'm real fortunate that I have lots and lots of parts. I can always just go get another one. So, and then just tweak it. We just take it like this, bend it a little bit, do it to all 4 on this particular reed gauge. Put it back together, check for a gap. If there's no gap, we're happy. We keep going. The assemble like this is a reed stop. One small Phillips head screw. Line up. It's always more difficult when the camera's on. Get it started. If you leave that screw loose, it'll go into the engine and damage the engine drastically. You'll have to do it again. So check it 2 or 3 times. But this is one of 6 I have to do. So, all right, it's all reassembled. Really can't see any light in it. If I put the flashlight in it, you can see light through it. But the book actually says 10 thousandths gap. It's acceptable. I don't think it is. And you have the motor all apart. Why not try to make it perfect? So I'll reset the reeds. Even though it's time consuming, you're in there. If you had to fix a reed after you put it all together, it'd take you an extra 2 hours, so, or less possibly, but might as well build the motor with confidence. And again, recheck all these screws. One of these screws comes loose, it goes in the engine. That's all she wrote. Installing the reed blocks on the intake. You can see one's installed. We're going to install 5 more. These are the Allen screws. One short one, one long one. The one little trick I use, I put a pool of Loctite when I like the Loctite. I like the Loctite when there's no lock washer. So I just dip each one before it goes in, tighten it up, and ensures it's not going to loosen up. Again, 6 reed blocks, 6 cylinders. Hopefully you guys are starting to figure out what those seal rings do on the crankshaft. I've assembled the cylinder heads, the water jacket. Now it's time to paint it. I'm going to tape off all the bare metal surfaces that require good contact. This is where a sensor goes for temp. This is where the thermostats go, so we just taped it off. We're going to touch it up so it looks good. Give you a chance to inspect it the final time. Nothing's better for inspecting than inspecting for paint. So I'm going to throw this coat of paint on there, and away we go. Alright, now it's time to install the bleed lines. You'll see the nipple here. What they do is there's on L2 strokes there's usually unburnt fuel that collects, so these bleed lines take the unburnt fuel, put it back into the intake. So I'm going to be installing the bleed lines, which is going to be all new hose, and we're going to need this chart. Now if I didn't have this book, I suppose I could have labeled all these lines and knew where everything was going, but I knew I had this book, so I use this book a lot for the bleed lines and, as I said, torque specs.